Folks, I am very happy to say that not only do we finally have a Superman movie, we finally have a Superman movie that we can be proud of, that we can love, and we can say, wow, that is Superman. And so James Gunn's Superman finally hit theaters last week. I got the opportunity to see it early on Tuesday. If you haven't seen my initial spoiler-free review, check it out. It's available for you to see. But I wanted to take an opportunity to really just dive into what makes this movie such a big deal. So aside from the fact that it was just an enjoyable ride, and I'm not going to talk about spoilers right now, so if you're worried that if you haven't seen the movie yet and you're worried that I'm going to say something that ruins it for you, don't worry, you're going to be okay. Ultimately, I kind of agree with James Gunn. At one point he was talking about, some of the Snyder Bro people were saying that they were going to intentionally spoil the movie for people. There's not really spoilers in this movie that I think could really ruin it for anybody. But in either case, you can feel safe here. So what is interesting about this Superman is how good it is, man. How wholesome it is, how optimistic it is, how modern day punk rock it is, which I think is really interesting. There's this idea that is posed in the film of what does it mean to be counterculture in a culture that is so pessimistic. And boy, if that doesn't just speak to everything that I really believe in and everything I'd love to see happen with this channel and with Movie News Monday and everything like that. So I do think that the discourse in general, but certainly the discourse surrounding films, surrounding comic book films in particular, and the fandom surrounding it, I understand why there's passion. I understand why some of the energy is fueled by, ultimately it's fueled by the love of the characters and the love and ownership that a lot of people have for these characters. But all in all, there's just such negative energy, and I think a lot of us could really benefit from getting a little hope in our hearts and choosing goodness. And that's what this Superman does. But aside from all of that, we need to discuss the actual business side and the economic side of Superman. Because on one hand, Superman is a incredible feat of filmmaking and a really fun time at the movie theater. On the other hand, we're talking about one of the most recognizable intellectual properties, period. Superman is not just one of the most famous superheroes, he is the superhero. It's literally called a superhero. And Warner Brothers has not had a lot of success with Superman in the big screen in the modern age. Superman has existed on small screens with Smallville, with Superman and Lois. So on and off for the past, basically 15, 20 years, Superman has been moderately successful on television. But how does he fare on the big screen? Well, let's take a look at the numbers. So we have the first box office reports for Superman, and all in all, this was an extremely promising weekend. So if you've never been on Box Office Mojo, hello, this is a movie buff's favorite website. You're able to see here essentially how the film is performing at the domestic box office, being the United States box office, because we center everything around ourselves, and the international box office, which, yes, is literally the entire rest of the world. So domestically, Superman's opening weekend was 122 million, which is a very, very, very solid opening weekend. It is hard, and look, I'm going back to the big screen for this. This is important enough to put on the big screen, folks. We are talking about millions of dollars, and I think that it's really fascinating when you're sitting down and thinking about the box office, how variable, numbers here and there are, and tracking and all this. This is millions of dollars we're talking about, okay? So put that into perspective as we're going forward here. Superman's opening weekend was $122 million domestically. That is an insanely promising domestic opening. That is a very solid run for the first weekend. Internationally, $95 million. Now that's not necessarily concerning, but it is relatively low. So why is Superman maybe not hitting everywhere else? Well, let's talk about it, right? So Superman is inherently an American character. It was truth, justice, and the American way for the longest time, even though this says truth, justice, and the human way. And, you know, recently in comic books, his motto has been adapted to be truth, justice, and a better tomorrow. But all in all, Superman is predominantly an American character, and this does become a harder sell overseas. It's why films like the initial Captain America movie was not just called Captain America. It was called Captain America: The First Avenger, so as to say, if you're going to watch the Avengers movie, you're going to want to watch Captain America. So it's harder to sell, and let's be honest, right now, the United States is maybe not everybody's favorite, and we don't need to get into politics here. We don't talk about politics the same level that movies don't talk about politics. You know, America's not in good favor with everybody, so there might be a perception that this movie is pro-America. There might be a perception that this movie is pro-American values, and so for some folks, that might just be harder to wrap their head around in the theater. There's also just a lot of stuff coming out right now. It is the summer, and this particular July is an incredibly loaded July. We have the Jurassic World movie that just came out prior, and Jurassic World does fairly well. The Jurassic franchise is a really good global franchise. The first Jurassic World broke billions of dollars. It dethroned the Avengers when that first came out. And then we also have the Fantastic Four releasing, you know, next weekend. So 2 weeks apart from one another, you have two kind of similar movies. They're superhero stories. They're big blockbuster movies. And not to mention, money's tight everywhere. Folks are not going out to the movies the same way. I did see an interesting sort of point that some folks were making, that specifically in the UK, there is a horrendous heat wave going on, and most movie theaters in the UK do not have air conditioning. So to sit for 2 hours and 9 minutes, and let's be real, with trailers, that's closer to 2.5, you know, maybe even 3 hours if you're the type of person who gets there early, without air conditioning in a hot summer day, you couldn't pay me to do that. So as of right now, as of the first weekend, Superman is sitting at 122 million gross. So what does that mean? That's a lot of money, but do they make their money back? Not quite yet. So let's talk a little bit about what it takes for a movie to make its money back. The reported budget for Superman is $225 million, and we're going to get back to this article here in a minute. Traditionally, for a movie to be profitable, you are looking to at least 2x the film's budget. Where did that number come from? What does that mean? It's kind of an arbitrary number that's been used over the years, but essentially, a movie that takes $225 million to make is a lofty, lofty investment for a studio like Warner Brothers. So they are going to put a lot of money into marketing this film. Now, if you've gone online, if you've gone for a drive in a major city, if you've gone to get a blizzard, if you've been on Spotify, if you have existed at all, McDonald's stores, Burger King, I'm sure, things like that. If you have just stepped outdoors, not even, if you've stepped outdoors or opened your phone, you have likely seen something related to Superman. That is marketing. That is the marketing budget. So at some point, for some reason, it was kind of decided that the marketing budget for these sort of tentpole blockbuster films would be about the same amount as the film itself. So in order to break even, Warner Brothers would be looking at, $450 million, but more realistically, probably closer to $500 million, which is something that this Wall Street Journal article claims, that this movie is seeking to get a total box office run of $500 million to break even. Now, again, you're thinking, wow, 225 times 2, that's 500. 122, hey, we're already starting our way there. That's just the first weekend. We're talking about millions of dollars. And I think that this is something that maybe is not given as much credit as it deserves, a great recent example being the Thunderbolts. Let's take a quick pause here while I look up how the Thunderbolts ultimately performed at the end of the day. Thunderbolts did ultimately come down as a loss for Disney. This film did not make as much money as it needed to. The total box office run for Thunderbolts ended up being $382 million, which on a, reported $200 million budget, not close to double that estimate. And Thunderbolts had a pretty massive marketing campaign too. Now, looking at the domestic opening weekend, this opened to $74 million. So a relatively promising start, compared to Superman's 122. Definitely not as big, but we're talking about a movie, Thunderbolts, that has a bunch of minor casts versus Superman, which is a massive film. And look, I'm not going to compare these two in anything other than numbers, just to explain how big these numbers can get. $74 million for a domestic opening on a total domestic run of 189 millions. That's only a little over $100 million that it made in its entire run. So almost, nearly half of its budget was made on the opening weekend. And this was a movie that came out in a time that didn't have a lot of competition compared to Superman, which is coming out off the heels of Jurassic World with Fantastic Four around the corner. There are concerns that could stifle this. Now, what does Superman have in its favor? Positive word of mouth. This movie is getting great reviews. It's got certified fresh Rotten Tomatoes score. It's got a pretty good, fan score. But so did Thunderbolts, right? And so does Elio. And so do all these other movies that end up being box office blunders, because we really need to consider the fact that there's a lot going on in the world, and it's really hard to commit to going to the movies. So all in all, what does Superman need? It needs momentum. It needs what's called in the box office game legs. If Superman can get legs and stay flying consistently with, $80 million each weekend for a couple weekends, it's en route to be, in the black. It's en route to actually get Warner Brothers some money. Now, this film is already considered a success if you were to ask the head of Warner Brothers, David Zaslav, our favorite CEO, and he says that very, very ironically. David Zaslav did put out a statement regarding the success of Superman's opening weekend, and I'm just going to read it verbatim here real quick so we can get through it. 3 years ago, I hired James Gunn and Peter Safran to reimagine and unify the creative direction of DC under one leadership team by breathing new life and excitement into one of the most iconic storytelling franchises in the world. That was one sentence. Basically, Zaslav is saying, hey, we needed a Kevin Feige. We tried to poach Kevin Feige. It didn't work. We decided it was going to be James and Peter, and here we go. This weekend, we watched Superman. I'm skipping a paragraph. This weekend, we watched Superman soar as James Gunn's passion and vision came to life on the big screen. Superman is just the first step. Over the next year alone, DC Studios will introduce Supergirl and Clayface into theaters and the series Lanterns on HBO Max, all part of a bold 10-year plan. The DC vision is clear, the momentum is real, and I couldn't be more excited for what's ahead. So, ultimately, David Zaslav is coming on here and saying, hey, victory lap, hey, we did it. And if you like this, we got one more next year and another next year and another next year. So David Zaslav is trying to say, hey, we're going to take this as a win and look ahead, because if you like what this team did, this team is behind everything that's going on next, which ultimately for me, I'm I'm happy with that. I'm happy hearing that, and I am happy knowing that Supergirl is coming to theaters next year, that we have a unique take on Clayface, a very B or C tier by means of public perception character coming to the big screen, and then the Lanterns getting a show on HBO Max. All of this is part of James's 10-year plan for DC Studios, which Zaslav mentioned there in his statement. And what does that 10-year plan ultimately lead to? That's a great question. If only we had, a Wall Street Journal article that covers everything there. This article talks about a couple interesting things in the behind the scenes of making Superman happen and getting this on the big screen. Essentially, it details the same story that Zaslav was talking about. Hey, we needed somebody to run the studio. We tried to get Kevin Feige. We tried to get other similar people, but ultimately James Gunn was the man. Funny enough, this article does also detail that James Gunn initially met with DC after his Guardians of the Galaxy firing, which ultimately was undone after enough public and private support. But they met with him to ask him to do another take on Superman with Henry Cavill's Superman. Gunn wasn't extremely motivated at that idea and ended up instead doing the Suicide Squad. But even through the Suicide Squad and through making Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, he just could not get the Superman movie out of his head. So he came back and he said, I'll do it. And not just that, I'll do everything from scratch, and thus became the birth of the DCU. This article does also detail exactly what we were just discussing, that 500 million globally is their break-even point, but they definitely would like to make money on this film, because this film is essentially, the building block for a massive, massive franchise that they're trying to put together over the next 10 years. We already know we're getting, Batman films in the future. We know we're getting animated films, family films, adult-centered R-rated movies. There's so much on the horizon. And they're exploring everything. This article talks about how there's Mr. Terrific and Jimmy Olsen spin-offs being considered based on how those characters were portrayed in the film, in the Superman film, but also, especially now, I imagine, after the public perception of those characters. There's an animated or a family direct-to-streaming series about crypto that's being done. There's so many different things in the works, and ultimately their goal is 2 theatrical releases and an HBO Max streaming service every single year. So that's a lot of content to develop, and it's not going to be cheap to do, and it's also going to require a lot of momentum. Now, what are they hoping is that momentum? Obviously, fan reception, critical reception, and at the end of the day, financial incentives. So this is a kind of what the money has been looking like at DC over the years. It's really been hard to pass the high highs of The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises. Superman in and of himself has not really ever crossed the $1 billion market. The crazy exceptions here being the Justice League movie and the Aquaman movie for some reason making $1 billion. I will never understand that. I really did not enjoy that film. So Superman in and of himself has never really crossed the $1 billion threshold. Obviously, you can see he's definitely crossed 500 million before, but granted, Man of Steel came out at a very different time with a very different theatrical behavior, and everything post-COVID is just completely up in the air as far as what hits and what doesn't. So other things that are interesting about this article that I think really stand out to me is how Zaslav's vision for Superman and the character has really just been all over the place. They were looking at so many different creative directions for what to do with the DC universe. This just breaks my heart. At some point, there was a film being considered about a black Superman, which is a character that does exist in the comics. I don't remember his name right now, but he's the Superman of Earth 2, with Ta-Nehisi Coates having written the script. And Ta-Nehisi Coates, an incredible writer. He's done comic book work before. He's worked on Black Panther. they dismissed that movie because it was considered too woke or too whatever. And Zaslav, as the head of Warner Brothers, was fully in charge of making that happen and making the decisions for what was going to happen with the franchise. And thankfully, he kind of became aware that this was not the right way to handle the studio. And ultimately, Peter Safran and James Gunn were brought on board. So that's where we are now. Gunn and Safran have a vision for this franchise. They are hopefully going to continue to succeed and continue to go in the right direction, but we really do need to see some promising numbers for Superman. What we know, Superman obviously just came out. Supergirl is in the can. That has been filmed. Clayface is going into production. The Lantern show is either still filming or about to be wrapped filming. And then from there, we have Peacemaker Season 2 and Creature Commandos Season 2 in progress. Everything else is still up in the air. So if Superman does not perform well, if Supergirl does not perform well, if general public interest doesn't seem to be going well, there is a likelihood that we do not get to see this 10-year plan play out, which would be incredibly disappointing. All in all, this first Superman movie, this entry into DC Studios and the new DC universe is extremely promising, both from a actual sort of conceptual storytelling perspective, but in the business sense, it is headed in the right direction. Will it continue to do so? We'll just have to wait and see. I'm really optimistic. I think this movie was good enough and has the potential to actually make an impact in the long term, but I'm really curious to hear what y'all have to say. So, did you see Superman? Did you like it? Let me know. Leave a comment. Do you think it's going to pass $500,000 in its box office run? I'm saying yes. I think it will. It may be slow. Maybe slow to get there, and it might just get there. But I think Superman will. Unless Fantastic Four is just absolutely incredible and takes away all the competition. Which I hate that we have to make it a competition between the two, but ultimately that's where we are. If you like this breakdown of the business world behind the DCU and Superman, please feel free to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and check out some of the other content we have here. We love breaking down movies and entertainment news, both the business side of things and the actual, fun review side of things. If you ever want to see me do any of these breakdowns live, I stream live on Twitch every single Monday for Movie News Monday, and the occasional other streams, so make sure you follow there too, so that you can get, a good peek at everything. Anyways, thanks for stopping by, and I will see you at the movies.